Hello, everybody, ladies, gentlemen, everybody inside and outside of that spectrum. Welcome to episode 8 of the TIWAKS podcast. Episode 8, no. I am one of your hosts. I am Nathan, the one who cannot shut up. On with me, I have my co host.
I am
Now,
Brennan.
before you start, I need to say.
Yeah, I was ready. I was like, there hasn't been an intro yet. I'm waiting for the intro that's gonna knock me on my ass for the rest of the episode and leave me unable to speak and dumbfounded.
I mean, let
Also, I
me
can't open up the stream.
subtweet this as well as I gotta text one of my other clients real quick. What are we going to talk about today, Brennan, while I get this all put together?
I see Brennan, the best of men, Nathan, who can't shut up.
There it is.
Um, I'm pretty sure both of those labels could apply to both of us. In terms of what I want to talk about today, I don't know. I always have a plan and then it's kind of dashed. Hang on, I'm getting double from this. I just want to have it open so I can have the chat open so that I know if people are trying to talk to us. I mean, what have you been playing recently? What's been on your gaming catalog?
Oh gosh, that is a really good question that I can answer here in like. Why is Twitter so hard? Okay. Bam. Boom. Bedabble. That is an excellent question. What have I been playing these days? We normally end with this, so to start with it, and there's your bamboozle for me right there. I have been playing a little bit of StarCraft 2 co-op still. We've all been playing GTA 5, which has been very fun. If not a little bit haphazard and wildly stupid.
So
Um,
bonkers.
what else have I been playing? I've been playing a little bit of Iron Harvest, that real-time strategy game that came out about 2 weeks ago now, I believe. Um, what
How
else?
is that? I haven't given that a boot
It's
yet.
it's not bad. So I'll actually talk about that in a second because I've also been playing or replaying Carry On, which is that Metroidvania style platformer that's more like a reverse horror game where you're the monster. As
Oh,
you,
right.
yeah, I've been replaying that. I should stream that because it's a short game. I think if you kind of know what you're doing, you can plow through it in about 2.5, maybe 3 hours. It took me 4 hours on my first run because I got a little lost because there's no map,
Sure.
which I don't think is a bad thing. It's something that I had to get used to because I would get lost like a lot. And then I'm going to jump back into the sinkhole that is Fire Emblem Three Houses. I have a Black Eagles run that I need to finish, and I've been playing solo bot games in League recently just to kill time. And I forgot
Hmm.
I forget that that game is, as much as I will actively like poo poo on League for its community. I forgot that it's actually a fairly well designed game for the most part, and I forgot that I own like half the champions in that game, because they have like 100 champions now or something like that, or maybe not that many, but a wide variety. And as it turns out, I own mostly brawlers and juggernauts. What a shock! What about
I
you? What
just
have you been
rec-
playing?
as a side note, I'm recognizing now, looking at my Discord, that half of my witty snorts of derision are not being picked up by my mic. So just take whatever perception of me you have, our dear audience, and just dial it up by like 3 points of just like repartee, I guess. Or don't. Probably more accurate
You
anyway.
know what? That was a word that went over my head. So continue.
I probably said it wrong. So the things I've been playing a lot of GTA. Uh, I have I've fallen into the hole that is GTA, because I've played it enough with you guys that I've reached the point where I'm like, I want to be able to buy stuff, and to buy stuff you need money.
Mm-hmm.
And since I refuse upon principle to buy in-game currency with real money,
Mm-hmm.
I have to actually play the game a lot. Um, which is interesting because, and this is very subjective. I find that a lot of the grinding, if you will, in Grand Theft Auto Online is not very much fun, at least for me. It is not a very rewarding experience, except for the money that you get in the game. And I catch myself, doing all these missions, particularly the missions I find myself spending the most time on, because they're the ones that you can kind of do between like your gun running missions and stuff like that, is the like crate delivery missions, the ones where you pick up the crates from around the city, you bring them to your warehouse, and then you sell them. And the thing for me that's kind of frustrating about that, and I know that this is gonna sound dumb, like this is the thought that I had, and then I thought I felt dumb for having it. But hear me out. It's really annoying to grind alone. Like most of those missions don't really work solo. I get it. You're all thinking, Brennan, called GTA Online. Why are you playing GTA Online solo? And my answer is the same reason that I play MMOs by myself. I want to get really good and really rich and then play with my friends. So that is, I think, the frustrating thing. Also, I'm not very good at driving in the game. So I get really frustrated because I'm constantly crashing into stuff. But that is not on the game. That is on me. Although I still think it's a little unrealistic that my gigantic Hummer can go sailing over the guardrail like a skylark when I take the corner going a little bit too fast. And by that I mean like 50. Anyway. But I've been playing that, and I have been playing playing a little bit of Age of Empires. I played Age of Empires 1 with you. I want to talk about that a little bit, that experience. Because that was interesting. We can talk about that as we move on. And then that's mostly it. I haven't been playing a huge variety of games in the last couple of weeks. I've been doing a lot of drawing and a lot of piano since I got my new piano, but not a lot of different kinds of games. I've also been watching a lot of streams and YouTube, so that's been taking up some time.
The other thing I realized that I have been doing is I've been doing a lot more recording recently. I have to take it in shorter bursts because I'm doing a lot more, and it's a funny thing. Here's the diversion that we're gonna go off on right now when it comes to songwriting and recording for me in particular, because everybody has their method in which they go about like writing. Any songwriter, composer, whatever, they have a way of thinking about how they're gonna go about it. I know for some people it starts with the lyrics, which I think is fairly common for singers. Sometimes it starts with a melody, which I find is a little more consistent among my more like classical composer friends, or at least like the classically trained ones. All of my songs either start with a chord progression or a riff. More riff in a lot of the stuff I've been writing recently. And the lyrics and the melody are often the last thing that gets put in. And half of the time, and it's probably why it takes me so long to get those recorded, because half of my recording time is just spent trying to figure out what works. It's definitely interesting, and I'm finding more and more when I go to write a melody, I overshoot what my comfortable range is, and then I get done with the first run of the verse. I'm just like, okay, we can't do that again. We have to find something better, which is good. Nathan, it forces me to be more. It makes me more creative, and it makes the melodies better, I think, because I'm trying to find like alternatives that still work and still flow as melodic lines.
For sure. I mean, I'm giving you shit. I haven't written any fucking music, so. What does that say?
But it's been interesting, even playing with stuff as simple as I need to start like setting like tape marks or something like that on my audio box, or just get another one for a recording space, because I have a different setting even in that gain setting for when I'm recording here for the podcast. versus when I am recording vocally. I can get them kind of the same, but like the distance becomes a much more important thing. I find, and then it's a psychological thing. If I'm closer to the mic, I'm not pushing nearly as hard, and I can kind of focus on my technique and stuff like that. When I'm further away, I feel like I have to project into it. But when you do that, you need to turn your gain down. Otherwise, you blow your mic out, or at least you blow out whatever you're doing. It's been very fun working on stuff that we never would have ever touched in my classical training. Things like scream tone, which scream tone and using a fry tone, which I don't have never really done and probably won't ever do, just because I can't sustain a good tonal fry, and I don't abuse my voice enough to be able to do a fry scream. And it's finding that balance of where that's going to sit and how to project that in a way that I can do it consistently. As one might expect, whenever I do, though, if I'm doing a line like that is specifically just that for recording purposes, I do that last. That's the last thing I do in my session. And then if I know that I need to do more recording after that, I can take some time and, let it rest a little bit, drink some water, and come back to it pretty fresh. But that's been really fun to work on as well. Like the things that you would expect somebody to do, and you see this a lot in like videos and stuff like that, where they're right on the mic, which I'm sure they have recording mics that are maybe a little better designed for that. I think Shure has a microphone in particular. It's that big blocky black mic.
Oh, hang on. Sorry. My headphones actually just died. Let me grab my cord.
Oh, go for it.
Sorry about that. I thought they were charging before we started here. This is a grade A professional stream.
Yep, as I respond to a work text. Oh boy, I'll respond to this later. Unrelated to any of this, and that was pretty much the end of that thought line anyway. But unrelated to this fun fact, in real estate, and a lot of other venues as well, not just real estate, but a lot of like official contract documents these days, the electronic signature process has become secure and stable enough that we have moved a lot of our contract documents to electronic signatures. Stuff like .loop and DocuSign, programs like that allow us to do virtual signings, which has been absolutely fantastic. We have a group account for my real estate team, and just recently they made an update or changed something with the privacy settings. Now our managing broker is the only person who can get into DocuSign. And we've been kind of doing a regular back and forth trying to figure out how in the hell I just need to get a verification code and we'll be all set to go, which is fine. It's just she's super busy and doesn't always get my texts right on time. So when we're trying to go back and forth and fix this right now, like I just got the verification code from her again, and I just want to tell it's not a big deal. We can figure it out tomorrow when we're not trying to go back and forth, and I'm totally fine right now. It's not an issue, so I'm not worried about it. But
Aha, there we go.
So yeah, that's been kind of a weird thing to deal with, this whole trying to figure out who can be on the account type thing. But it's just kind of a weird work thing. But yeah. It's been interesting doing a lot of that recording session stuff, because I've never done recording. That's never been my thing. I've always been live performances. So transitioning into that has been really interesting, and getting used to stopping, do another take, listen back. Does it sound good? No. Okay. Go back, do another take. Getting used to that, and being able to objectively hear something, say, that sounds like shit, and then move on to the next thing has been uh, just a fascinating thing. Um,
It's interesting because that, in a very real way, I think that mindset is kind of the opposite of the mindset that we've been trained to have for live stage performance.
yeah, you have
And
one shot to get it right.
well, but not only that, it's very much the mindset of if something bad happens, leave it in the wind. Like, don't think about it. Whereas if you're doing some kind of recording, you have to think about. You're like, okay, I made that. I mean, and you would later, like you would think, okay, after the show, you would think, okay, I made this mistake. I need to like analyze that, figure out what the issue was that I was dealing with there. But when you're recording, it's very much an issue of in the very moment you need to be like, no, that wasn't right, and I need to know why. And I think um, I did get a little bit of experience with that when I did some recording with Cow. You guys did recording when you were in there as well, right?
I'm
Sometime.
sure we did.
Yeah, because we did it with I did it with Cow for the Eschenwalds recording, which was that was I don't know if it's usually that tough, but it felt like it was really tough.
The
Which was
Eschenwald's music was not easy.
well, but also yes, definitely, but also the just the recording guy we had come in. I think his name was I don't want to mess up his name because he's totally gonna watch our stream, but he he was really like, we got to do that again, we got to do that again, and the result was really great. But it just felt like it was a lot, and we did that, and we did a group recording for with Corral, which I remember as being like kind of a lot less intense, but still a lot, and it takes on that another dimension as well when it's that many people involved, right? And especially if it's if it's an institutionalized thing, because then you can't just be like, I'm too tired, I'm gonna come back to this, or I'm just not in a good headspace. It's like, nope, you got to be here, and this is the shot you have,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, it's also different when when you're doing home recording or you have your own studio work out of, you can kind of set your pace, but when you bring somebody in to record, and this was something when I was at Azusa, and we would do recordings every now and again, the thing that like really pissed me off, even as
Mm.
somebody who's typically a live performer, when we were doing recordings and we would have a couple dudes that would just kind of jackass around, and I had moments where I pull them aside, I'm like, dude, shut the hell up. Like, you are the reason why we have to be here so long. Unfuck your shit and figure yourself out.
It's it's so frustrating to not be the reason why this is taking so long. And don't get me wrong, like I'd always rather be that person than be the one who's like, "Oh God, I'm fucking up. I didn't practice enough." But when you see people just like goofing off, and this gets less and less common, I think, the more serious the occasion. But like when you see people just like goofing off, and you've been there for 3 hours, it's just like, dude, please, like we all want to leave, you know?
Oh no, I even in the early part of my college career, I would go from zero to shut the hell up in about a minute and a half.
It's
And like the to their in their defense, a lot of the dudes that we had in our men's corral there up there were it was an open thing. You could just sign up, and if you could learn music, you could be in it. And it was very much more like it was closer to like a frat than anything else. It's just we had stupid rules we had to follow, but
Mm.
overall it was it was more of a like dude bonding experience type thing, and the music was fairly secondary. In contrast to a lot of the other groups on campus that were specifically for music, whereas MC was mostly just dudes hanging out, and every now and again we'd actually learn music.
Well, and that's great, but if you're in a situation where you've all decided to get a recording done,
Yeah,
like it's like if you didn't want to do this, then why did you agree to it?
yeah, and that was always the thing that would really frustrate me was you're in this group, we're doing this recording. I've been here for 3 hours. I've been in this building for 9 hours. I need you to focus. I get it. You're a comms major. It doesn't matter. You have 3 classes that you have to go to this entire semester. I understand. I don't care.
Yeah.
I know, like, okay, I should say communications as a major is an important major these days. And there's a lot of universities that take it very seriously. They have great classes, they churn out really great people. APU's communication majors were a goddamn joke.
Really, I don't know anything about it.
I knew comm majors that just I would talk they would talk about their classes like, oh yeah, I have to take 15 credits this semester, and I got it's all, and I was like, dude, I have to max out my credits and I have 0 credit classes. I don't care.
Yeah. No,
I've I've never been one to try to play the misery Olympics with people, but even in those moments I had to just cut them off and say, I acknowledge that that is hard for you. I'm not the person to complain to.
well, it becomes the moment of it's one thing to complain, it's another thing to use to complain as an excuse to someone else who has more going on. It's like, look, dude, like that does sound hard. That sucks, but I have like double that amount of work, and that doesn't make me morally superior to you. But it does mean that it's kind of more important to me to get out of here than it is to you. So I'd appreciate it if you could respect that. You
Mm-hmm.
know, like I think that's the thing too is people get defensive because they're like, well, why is your time more important than mine? And it's like, well, it's not really, but I have more things to do, and we agreed to a set time, and because of you, we're going to go over. I feel like music in general, ensemble based performance, including, of course, shows, operas, is really. I feel like the way that someone behaves in that setting tells you a lot about their priorities. And let me preface by saying, like, I understand that I'm coming from a very privileged position, and people can have a lot of stuff going on in the background, and that's totally fair. And a lot of those are struggles that I might not understand or never have had to deal with. It could be home life struggles, it could be financial struggles, like gender identity struggles, discrimination struggles, and like I get that well, I don't get it, but I empathize with it. And if that's stuff that you have going on, like that's understandable. But I think that you really do run into cases where you have people who are just not, like, it's not that they have more things going on, it's not that they're in a bad place necessarily, it's just that they're really not choosing to prioritize the project. And I think that when you see those people, it tells you that they kind of don't really understand respecting other people. Because I've experienced a lot of people in my life in those circumstances who kind of act like, oh, I messed up, that's a bummer, like, aren't I silly, as if, and they kind of seem to have the attitude of like, well, if I mess up, that only harms me. It's like, well, no, it doesn't just harm you. You're harming other people.
Welcome to the ensemble, bitch.
Yeah, I think it's such a valuable learning skill. Segue into why we should have lots of arts in our schools. Uh, I think that it really, if you have a lot of experience in music and or on stage, or both, of course, it really kind of, I think you can hardly escape learning that. It's hard to not learn how easy it is for one person to screw up everybody else.
It's I think it's a combination of both the arts, and it's the same reason why, as much as I think sports is a little overfunded, why I still think that team sports are important, because both will teach you that value of there is no I in team. There's no we either, but that's, a linguistics argument to be had at some point. But in any team sport setting, whether it's football, or as they call it in other countries, gridiron, which sounds
Really, really.
way yeah. I believe I want to say it's the UK, but there's other countries that do not refer. They don't call it American football. They call it gridiron, which
That
sounds
is
so much cooler.
and more American.
Yeah, like
Dare I say.
that's something that an American would come up with. It's like, well, let's not call it football. Let's call it gridiron. That's metal. But whether it's American football or basketball, even baseball, all these different sports, if you underperform, that will affect the performance of your team. In the same way, when you're performing on stage, if you're underperforming, you are affecting the entire performance. It doesn't matter if you are the lead person at the dead center of the stage every time, or if you are in the background as part of the chorus. If you are not bringing your A game, that affects the entire presentation. It doesn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't. That's the thing about going into the performing world, and why, while I have, as you mentioned, I have a lot of empathy for people who are going through a lot of whatever your struggle may be, because I had my own fair struggles when I was in college at Azusa specifically. I was, as you could say, riding the struggle bus every day. Probably multiple struggle buses. I was riding them around like roller skates. And I still found a way to bring that A game to every single performance, every single rehearsal. It's what you had to do. It was the price of
Right.
entry.
I
And
have. Oh, go ahead.
I now know that was maybe, in those moments, it was maybe pushing it a little too far for me, because I did not have that necessary string of proper support to say, like, hey, we know you're struggling and it's okay. Part of this whole team experience is also knowing that we can pick up a little bit of the slack. And I didn't get a lot of that. And it's funny, getting to PLU was the place where they would have did that, and I didn't need that. I I still had problems that to this day I'm still sorting out, but not in the horn of plenty that I had at the time, of cacophonous issues. But anyway,
You're telling me. Wait, Nathan. I'm sorry. You're telling me that you haven't become a perfect person. This is shocking.
I'm like 7/10 of the way there, I
Hey,
think.
that's pretty good, and I can stand behind that assessment.
It's a work in progress. Is the problem is the other 3/10 take 107 years to get to, so I'm not gonna live. I mean, I
Oh
might,
God.
but I don't think I'm gonna live that. I don't think that I'm gonna live to 140. I don't think it's gonna happen.
You know,
And it's mostly on the predication that I like Killer Burger and greasy like shit too much.
oh God. I I'm gonna touch this lightly, and then we're gonna leave it because this is a video game stream. We're not supposed to be talking about the human the tragedy of the human condition. But like, the older I get, the more I feel like you have to live at least like 100 years to even begin to be like a fully functioning member of society. And I don't just mean financially. I mean, or in the traditional markers that we associate in our culture, like having your own home, or having your own home and a car and a stable job, and a spouse, which all of which are hard enough.
Yeah.
Uh, but just being at the point where you possess the social skills and empathy to navigate society without making people around you unhappy and yourself. I just feel like it's a never-ending learning process.
It is. You are constantly adapting to a changing world. It would be one thing if the world, let's say, suppose that we finally achieve a relative world peace and we stop being horrible to each other, then you just have to adapt to that norm. But even if you have that, you have changing societal norms and cultural phenomena that happen that you are constantly trying to adapt to. I mean, case in point, if you look at the music world and the way that has developed, like metal did not exist 60 years ago. That's a fairly new, well, not that was 1960s. Metal was just like rock and roll was just kind of getting a start and becoming its own thing. And now, like, it's everywhere. You have people that witness the birth of an entire music genre that are still trying to wrap their heads around that because that's not what they grew up with. You have something as simple as that, somebody trying to adapt. Like, they grew up, in terms of rock bands, they had like the Rolling Stones and the Beatles, and that was heavy at the time because that's what was there. And now you have bands like Avenged Sevenfold, Anthrax, Lamb of God, Cannibal Corpse, which I don't think is around anymore because of the whole arrest for their lead guitarist.
Was that the one who had skulls in his garage?
Yeah, he had
called I Have Skulls in My Garage.
It was so I think it was an illegal possession of a wide range of different firearms, and they have song titles such as "There Are Skulls in My Basement" and "I Have Guns in My Home, comma, for murder." Those are song titles of a band called Cannibal Corpse. What did you expect?
So funny.
You know,
that is so funny.
Slayer, Slipknot, Periphery, all these different bands that just there's no. It's almost impossible to trace the DNA all the way back to the Rolling Stones. How do you do that? Where there's a disconnect that happens at some point, I think, where you can't. They're so far removed from that to a certain extent. I also have this. Here's where we're going. I'll talk about Iron Harvest eventually, but I have this running theory that in terms of modern music that we have, like pop versus rock and roll and all that kind of stuff, I have this running theory that there are essentially 2 points of origin. One is the Beatles, and the other is the Rolling Stones. And if you branch off from there, you get the entirety of like pop music and the entirety of rock and roll and everything that splits off from there. Give me just a second. My contact lens just freaked out on me, so I'm gonna turn away from stream for a second to get that fixed. Your thoughts?
How dare you? Yeah. Well, you said something about there being a disconnect eventually between what we have now and what there was some time ago. With, as you mentioned, like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, that first wave. This is just a music stream now, by the way. But an analogy that comes to mind for me is something that actually my dad was talking about when it comes to linguistics and looking at common ancestors when it comes to human language. And if anyone happens to be listening to this who knows a lot about linguistics and I'm just blowing shit, then whatever. But my impression is that there's a conclusion in linguistics that it is impossible to reconstruct, for example, the original Indo-European language, because we have reached the point where the commonalities that we can find in the languages that now exist that we're pretty sure are from that same language family could also be explained by random chance. Like, it's to the point where there's not really any way in which we could reconstruct the original from what we have. And I don't think we're quite there with music because, as you mentioned, some of these time skips have been so fast. And thinking about language, we're talking about thousands of years, whereas with this music evolution, yes, we can trace it back probably as long, almost, if not longer. That's a question for paleoanthropologists to answer. But talking about these modern music evolutions, I think that we can see traces of that. Not that a great musicologist couldn't, for example, trace something from an Avenged Sevenfold song back to, this I can follow the line all the way back to like a Rolling Stones piece and like talk about these similarities there. But
I'm sure if I sat down and actually like did the route, essentially, I would be able to find.
But I think we run into the point where, like, for the casual or even like semi-casual observer, it can be hard to make that connection, not intellectually, but just like listening to the music. It's so easy to be like, well, this is a distinct style. This is its own thing, you know?
I have some. Keep talking. I have a contract thing that I have to futz with real quick off stream.
Yeah, no problem. Bringing it back to video games a little bit. Just in theory, that's what the podcast is about.
Right.
Never ends up being that way. But you know, we talk about these different communities and how a single community, which was at one point very unified, like for example the rock and roll community, when it started because it was so small, and how those communities grow and split and have, you know, it seems almost necessarily have fracturing and have, intense ideological disputes over, what to an outsider seems like an entirely trivial matter, and you can find, I don't feel like this is a very hot take. Like you can find examples of this in theology, for probably the most obvious example, and pretty much every other feature of human society. But again, to bring it back to video games, I think it's interesting to see how that can play out in like video games, in the pop culture sphere as a whole. I think that we can end up with groups of communities which are so divided about. We can get to the point where we have a single game. So we have a player base for a single game. They all agree that the game is good, or at least that they want to play it.
Yeah.
And we get to the point where there's just intense ideological feuds. Maybe not, to the same severity as the theological or anything like that, but particularly with the rise of the internet, where people can be anonymous and, kind of vent their opinions without fear of social reprisal, you see a lot of small communities forming wherein people are just like at each other's throats over what an outsider would say was like a completely trivial thing. And I think that we see it most with like balancing disputes in competitive games. So like I don't play a lot of League of Legends, but I'm willing to bet that there's a huge community of people every time a new balance change comes out. I bet there's a bunch of people who are super angry. They're saying, "No, that was completely balanced. This is bullshit." Or, "No, like you just made everything worse. Like this is bullshit." And those people will argue and yell at each other online. And I always just think it's so funny to think about how even at the smallest level of cultural distinction, people are always people are always willing to kind of like split up further. I just think that that's fascinating. A fascinating thing to think about people is we form these tiny little groups, and then we're like, well, but now we're all in this tiny little group sharing our special interest. Well, now we're not special anymore, so we got to split up again. And maybe it's not as deep as that, but I just think it's interesting that you can draw that parallel through human society all the way through video games to like theological disputes, all that kind of stuff. Particularly as well, I was thinking about, you can come in anytime you're ready to. I'm just kind of freeballing at this point.
I
But
just gotta work through this real quick.
no, yeah, I just don't want to. I don't want to be monologuing if you can also say something. But funnily enough, something I haven't seen too much of is a lot of kind of animosity among StarCraft players, and maybe I just haven't seen it, but just on the subreddits that I've looked at, which I feel like Reddit and Twitter are kind of reasonably good barometric measurements of how the wind is blowing on the internet in terms of just like common communities. I could be totally wrong. I've accepted I accepted years ago that I'm no longer hip. So maybe there's some young people watching this right now who are like, these guys are so dumb. Like that's not where the discourse is happening anymore. But from what I've seen on those platforms, at least, it seems like there's not a lot of animosity towards people who main different races in StarCraft. And I would guess that the reasons for that, just off the top of my head, why it might be different, I would guess. I think it's even though people do main certain races, I think it's unusual for people to not have at least a little bit of experience playing all the races in the game because the game kind of encourages you to. Particularly if you play any of the campaigns, they really encourage you to view to like see all the playstyles. I mean, the most obvious example of that being if you played, the Wings of Liberty campaign and the Heart of the Swarm campaign, then the Legacy of the Void campaign. You've got Terran, Zerg, and Protoss. They shoved it down your throat. They said, play all the races. And I think it also helps that the game has very, very rigorous balancing. Like they're continuing to balance the game all the time. And I think that kind of helps people be less upset. I think it also helps that it's not a team game. Because for something like League of Legends, I think the reason that people get so upset is similar to what we were talking about earlier when it comes to music. See, it's all connected. Guys, this podcast was all planned. But I think that it comes back to that idea of it's very frustrating to feel like you're failing because of someone else. If it's your fault, it's your fault. And that can be frustrating, but you can at least kind of be like, well, I fucked up. But if you are on a team with other people, I think it's a lot easier to get upset at them for messing up. And I think that can kind of lead to those divisions within the community. It can just kind of lead to a little bit more of a toxic community. Because honestly, I think you're more likely to get angry at your own team than at the enemy team when you lose. Because the enemy team's not doing anything wrong. They're just punishing your team for being idiots. In your mind, right? It's hard to be mad at the other team for winning when that's what you're trying to do. But it's easy to be mad at your team for sucking. Because why do they suck so much, and why are they bringing you down? I think there's a lot less of that in StarCraft because I think that I don't know how active the team game community is, but I think that it's less active than the solo community. So, and I don't know. I'm not sure how the matchmaking is, and I think that would play a big role. But I would guess that the matchmaking is decent if you're just playing randoms. That's the other thing, though, is I don't think this is common for people to just be like, I'm going to play some StarCraft 4v4s and just queue random. Because, I mean, the reason I think that is because I've done that a couple times, and it takes forever to find a game. Whereas I think in League, that's, like, normal.
I do remember. I'm getting this finished up now, so I can be a little more. I can participate a little bit more. I do remember the whole queuing up in League being like not quite as big a frustration as like. It's definitely better to queue up with people that you know and that you've played with for a while, so you can have that good team experience. But we've. Why is it that this? You know what? I'm gonna edit. Hang on. This is being. I hate dot loop. I love dot loop. I hate dot loop. You know what?
What is dot loop?
Dot loop is there. That should, and I'll just sign it. No, god damn it, that's not gonna work. Hang on. Add signature. Hey guys, you get to watch me try and do my job on stream, but not actually watch it because it's contract stuff that you guys aren't allowed to see. But you can hear the audio of it, of me getting frustrated at a system that I don't understand.
If we need me to take more time, I'd just like to...
No, I just said can sign, share. That should do it. That should fix it, and it should be fine now. So I can just pop in and sign this stupid document that is not stupid. It's an important, like... Click, adopt and sign, done. Right? Sure. That probably worked. Finish signing.
Can I say as a side note that I'm really enjoying your Twitter content as Callan Voss? I logged into Twitter this morning and I was just like, God damn it, Nathan, now I actually have to check Twitter.
You're welcome. For those of you who don't know, I started a Twitter account that is just going to be me RPing most current characters that I think would be fun on Twitter. I think my favorite one so far, by and large, is let's pull it up here. Oh, Travis has found it now, so he's making his
Yep.
replies.
Have you not seen them yet?
I just saw them. Oh boy, it's. Does anyone know how to get ketchup stains out of leather? This isn't a joke. Bobby went to town on a bucket of chicken nuggets, got ketchup all over his trousers. He doesn't care, but people keep asking if it's blood, and I'd rather not field that question right now. So yeah, you get hits like that. So yeah, I don't know what we're talking about right now because my focus is pulled away.
That's okay.
Let's talk about Iron Harvest, this
Sure.
real-time strategy game that I've been playing a little bit of. It's You never played the Company of Heroes games, correct?
I did not, correct.
Company of Heroes, and this you can feel the DNA of this game kind of strewn throughout it in different ways. Company of Heroes, I feel like I've talked about it on stream, but I'll talk about it anyway. It is a World War II real-time strategy game that focuses on small-scale engagements between infantry, armor, and through the usage of munitions and army powers and stuff like that. You can call in the occasional airstrike, but it's not super common because that wasn't super common back then. You couldn't just like radio for an airstrike and know that it was going to be there because you had planes on station. Like it was becoming a thing, but it wasn't as prevalent.
Sure.
It focuses heavily on the tactical, like split second decision making that you have to make, kind of more like a squad leader or a company commander rather than like this big overarching theater of war. There's a couple different game modes that you can progress through, but the common one was either like just wholesale elimination, which you would expect out of most real-time strategy games. They also had like a victory point, like you had to hold these points and you eventually won. You gathered resources by capturing different points on the map that would then give you either I think it was manpower, munitions, or fuel. And you can use those for different things. Manpower is mostly used for, I mean, manpower is used for everything, but it's particularly useful for infantry. Munitions is for some of the infantry and armor powers, as well as some infantry and armor upgrades, and different, like, more specialized infantry squads will require munitions resources, and then all the vehicles need fuel. It had I don't want to call it a rock, paper, scissors element to it, but every combat encounter would be decided by a number of factors that you ran into on the battlefield. There was the actual battlefield itself. If you were attacking, you generally need more troops, or you need to get creative about how you assault. If you're defending, you have your entrenched position, you have cover from fire, but you are stationary. And your opponent can take advantage of that. If you have just two squads of infantry going up against each other, their armaments will decide if it's just a stand up, you're in cover, they're in cover, and they're shooting each other. Their armaments and their veterancy will ultimately decide that fight. But the second that if you can find a way to flank around them and get them from the flanks, or even better, get them from behind, you can just wipe them out pretty quickly. If you think that your infantry is going to get wiped out, order them to retreat and they'll just haul ass. Another one might get picked off. They might be okay. You never know. You bring a machine gun onto the field, that changes things. Now, not only do you have fire superiority in terms of being able to mow down infantry, but you can also suppress them and effectively make them a non-threat in combat. If your opponent brings out a machine gun, you either mortar that position, you flank around it, you essentially use one squad as bait behind hard cover, and you send another squad around, you call in airstrike, or you bring in a tank. If your opponent brings in a tank, you come out with a tank destroyer, you hide an AT gun, or you hopefully have some Panzerfaust or some bazooka ready to deal with it. And it's just this constant cycle of, if they do this, you need to have this ready. I like Company of Heroes. I think it tried really hard to be a competitive game and it just never really made it. Because while it is a fun experience, those matches go forever. They're so goddamn long. Um,
Like competitive civilization.
yeah, and I'm running into that issue with Iron Harvest where it shares a lot of that DNA, where there's less like infantry, specialized infantry squads per se. Like there's not like the mobile MG42 nest or the Browning 30 cal team. There's really nothing like that per se, or at least not as readily available. There's not really the same level of like fire superiority will decide certain things and you can suppress enemies and things like that. Or at least it's not as apparent. It feels maybe closer to Command and Conquer or StarCraft in terms of you're just trying to batter down their hit points and kill them all. It's set in this kind of weird steampunk 1920s post World War One world that it all takes place in Europe, I think. And from what I can gather, the side that was the Russians has decided to. Well, actually, there's a third party that's involved. It's like the secret underbelly organization that's orchestrating this war, which, as a teenager, I thought that was a stupid premise, and as an adult, I kind of understand now. But there's these powers that are orchestrating this war between the Russians, the German, Frank, European groups, and caught in the middle of that are the Polonians, the this essentially Poland, and
Poor
it's
Poland, man.
yeah, I know, right? It's the
Can't
plot
catch a
is
break.
the plot is good for the single player campaign. Like it's a fairly compelling story. The characters are interesting. The plot points themselves are maybe a little contrived every now and again, but the storytelling is decent enough. The graphics and animation in the real time strategy segments are fine because you don't need a lot of detail there. But when they go into like the cutscenes where they tell the stories, I'm like, you're using the same engine, and you know what? This would have looked good for PlayStation 3 era, I think.
Yeah,
I mean, I acknowledge this was done by an independent studio. This wasn't done by some big name, heavily backed. This was, an indie dev and an indie publisher. And for what it is, it's fun. But the problem I'm kind of running into is that none of the campaign missions are short. Like they're all, you got to slot out like an hour to play a mission, if that. And the other problem I'm running into with the campaign is that there's this really bizarre push and pull and push and pull and push and pull that happens as you're trying to push to your objectives. And I expect a little bit of that in this style of game because you
sure.
run into that in Company of Heroes, but not to this degree where it's really just like this seesaw, but every time you go up, you're at 179 degrees, and when you flip back down, it's like this the entire time.
Yeah.
In terms
Like,
of
oh, I'm
this,
so close, and then you get driven all the way back.
yeah, it's exactly what happens. And it's the thing that I'm running into is that the cover system, while it is implemented, it's not implemented well enough. And it's not necessarily that cover doesn't matter. Cover super matters, but it's one squad will occupy like an entire like 15-foot row of stone wall or something to that regard, where you could easily fit two behind there and they'd still be
Mm,
more or less like safe and comfortable. And sure, if a grenade gets lobbed in there, they're gonna die. The other thing is that there's no real incentive to use maneuverability to break those, because I think the mechs are a little too easily and readily available. There's too many light ones that you can just churn out and make them run through, and they're immune enough to small arms fire that they can make that risk.
mm,
It feels like a game where I'm just trying to rush to the biggest, baddest mech that my army can support and field a whole bunch of those,
yeah.
because they just curb stomp everything else. It's not it's not a competition at that
Yeah, I
point.
mean, it's not a situation like StarCraft where like if the other guy battle cruiser rushes, like you can make corruptors or hydralisks, or make fucking spore crawlers. Like you don't have to have endgame units to beat endgame units.
Yeah, and that's kind of the thing that you're running into with this game is that yeah, I'm sure at a higher level of play I'd be able to like take some anti-armor gunners and kind of root around the map and everything like that, but it's too easy just to make that like the towering Polanian death mech and with the the giant twin cannons and just blast the shit out of everything and
Well, yeah, and it gets to the point in a game, I think, where it's like, and I think we've talked about this or something similar to this before on stream, where you get to the point of, I understand that if everyone is a god, this is balanced. But if one way to win is way, way, way easier than another way to win, it makes it less balanced for everyone but experts. You know?
yep. uh
I've played a lot of games like that,
I
where
think we
it's
were
like,
talking about that when we were first chatting about League and talking about how a lot of the balance changes they make are for the pro circuit.
yeah,
And it's yeah, I don't think there's enough patching that they could do to really change this about this game. It's I think an inherent flaw and I think it's what's going to keep it from having a competitive scene is that there's no build orders per se. You build your creation structures and you just upgrade them. It's not a bad. It's fun. It's well designed. Everything makes sense. It's not as well optimized as I would like. I can tell they're maybe trying to do a little too much with the physics engine. And it's cool when you have that giant mech walk through a building. Like it doesn't try to walk around it. They don't care. What your brick and mortar doesn't mean shit.
Collateral never heard of her.
Yeah, exactly. I would give that game a solid 7 out of 10 or maybe like a 7.5. It's got some flaws, but like it's a solid. The things that I don't like about it are inherent, but the bulk of the game is well designed and it's fairly fun. It's just there's too many games that it needed to learn from,
Mm,
I think. And it maybe tried to go its own way, which is not. We are too entrenched with systems that already work to make that Hail Mary pass and not do it well enough.
yeah, it seems like it relates kind of to what we were talking about when it comes to valuing the classics and what they did for the genre. And we say a lot, like this game wouldn't exist without this. And I think that when you make a game, like you're saying, in the same genre as a lot of greats, and you kind of try to go a different direction, I think that the kind of burden of proof is on you to prove why you shouldn't have done what works.
It is definitely very important to go down that route and ask yourself that question regularly. When we talk about like as well as being critical of what are the greats,
Sure.
there's an era of gaming, and I think thankfully it is one that I think you were spared from. Because I realized your entry into console gaming was very late,
Yeah.
and your intro to gaming in general was later, and you did a fair amount of PC gaming, and PC gamers were spared from this a little bit, was because they weren't making a lot of great games during this era. But the N64 and PlayStation 1 era, there are few games in that era that if you take off your nostalgia glasses feel playable. And this
Mm.
is coming from some like I played a shitload of PS1 games. There are games from that era that I absolutely adore. Some of them are a little cult, little niche. There's one in particular. It's an RPG from. I don't remember the people who made the game. I'll look it up here. Actually, you know what? I can pull it up right now. But it is this little game called Legend of Dragoon. Made by. Developed by SCE Japan. What the hell is SCE Japan Studio? Hang on.
I don't know.
Yeah. Was it? Oh, just Sony Computer Entertainment. Um, I love that RPG. I thought it was fantastic. I went back and played it on an emulator about 10 years ago. It was cooler in the early 2000s. It was way cooler in the early 2000s.
Yeah, I mean, you really reach a point where you're like, oh, I've played games that do everything this thing is trying to do, but better.
I I appreciate the N64 era of games. I appreciate what they did for 3D gaming. I mean, the action adventure genre as we know it would not exist without games like Super Mario 64 and The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. But miss me with that shit if you think that Ocarina of Time is an untouchable masterpiece. It did a lot for the era. It is important. It is still fun. But every game that has come after it has learned from it in some important way. Even, and it took a long time, even the franchise itself eventually learned from itself.
Yeah. You know, go ahead.
You cannot. You are allowed to love these games and you're allowed to love the memories that they gave you, but you cannot use that as an excuse to defend things that are wrong about them or things that have aged poorly. And here's the thing. I will bash some of those games, and part of it is because I didn't necessarily grow up with them, but I still recognize their contributions. I think we can all agree, every human being on the planet, deep down, can agree on this. The N64 controller is a monstrosity, and it needs to be dealt with accordingly. Civi 11 referred to it as the Tommy Wiseau of gaming, and in so much that it is, and I quote, inarguably horrible, but it has this kind of strange alien charm to it, end quote. I hate, even as a kid in the late 90s, I knew that controller was garbage. I knew for a fact the N64 controller was an abomination. Looking at it hurt my brain. There was no reason for it to be designed like that. It unequivocally sucks. And there are people who defend that damn thing. I'm like, why? There's a reason why even Nintendo has themselves, if you look at the Switch Pro controller, looks almost... Oops. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I jostled one of my cables. It looks almost exactly like the Xbox 360 controller. I just don't have the Pro controller. But this is a well-designed controller. The ergonomics of this are right. There's a reason why the DualShock 2 or the DualShock 1, the original one, with those joysticks on the PS1, why that has been the basis of their design. And because it's a control design that works and it makes sense. And the N64 controller is... I'm sorry for going off on this wild tangent. That thing is just a crock of fuck. I cannot deal with that monstrosity. I hate that controller so much.
It just, it makes you wonder why.
It speaks so much to Nintendo's power as a company, because I think if Sony had come out with that controller, they would have been lampooned to the dirt. But Nintendo already had the NES, the Super Nintendo, and the Game Boy to back them up. So everybody would be like, it's weird, but I mean, it's Nintendo, they get to do what they want. And then they've just kind of ridden Nintendo. I'm sorry. I love you. But I have to say this. You've only just now figured out how to make games again, I think. I loved the GameCube era. The GameCube was underpowered. The Wii and the Wii U. What were you thinking?
They're Mario Kart consoles.
Yeah. Everybody bought the Wii U because it had the novelty of that control, as well as the fact that I think it was the cheapest console on the market. And then, like, okay, you know what? I'll let that slide. I think the Wii was still like a wildly underpowered thing because it relied too much on a gimmick that lost its novelty fairly quickly. Because when you learned it wasn't real motion controls, it was using that IR sensor. It breaks things a lot. And when they put in that gyroscope that allowed a little more motion control, they went hard into those gimmicks again. So everything had this motion control component that just there are.
If you ever played a third-party game made for the Wii, you understood just how much it was not motion control.
Exactly. And the games that they did well with the motion controls, it showed the love and care they put in. But the only one of them that I actually ever liked that's like, oh, there's a fair amount of motion controls and they work was Metroid Prime 3. And it's because it is a first-person shooter. So, you know what? That's kind of conducive because it's kind of like point and shoot. And, like, they had cool moments where, like, you would reach out to grab something, twist, pull, twist, and push it back in. Like, that kind of stuff was kind of neat. But then, Skyward Sword, another Zelda entry that relied on the Wii Motion Plus, that little gyroscope thing they put in. Skyward Sword can fuck itself with a pineapple. I hate that game. I think it's trash. I hate that game with passion. I hate that game for a number of reasons. One, I hated the motion controls. I think that was a stupid decision, but that goes fine. They made it work as best as they could. The companion they gave for you, Fee, was, man, I thought Navi was bad. Navi is annoying, but Fee is just a badgering monster. It's this companion that's like, hey, listen, you've heard the meme. Hey, listen.
Yeah.
Take all of the sing-song and cartoonishness out of that and replace it with data analytics and percentages. Because that's what Fee was. She would tell you shit like, there is a 95% chance that the item that you are looking for is in that dungeon. Stuff like that. Do you know how egregious that is in a Zelda game?
Oh my god, that sounds so annoying.
But the worst thing, by far, is one of the recurring bosses that you have to fight, which is just an avocado with a mouth. And eventually they gave him feetsies with little white toes you had to smash. And then they gave him big alright, you know, here is your dramatic reenactment of the calamity or whatever it was. First, it was this. Then it was this. But imagine feet. And then you fought that thing like 4 times.
I gotta look that up now. I gotta do it.
I hate so much of that game, and a lot of it is predicated on that one boss fight that you repeat over and over and over again.
What is it called again?
The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword. I would recommend you look that up after the stream.
Yeah.
I was so...
He does like an avocado.
Right? I'm not wrong!
He looks like the love child of Godzilla and an avocado.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, people wonder why I hate that game.
Oh my god, that's so funny.
That's why, like, I remember when they announced Breath of the Wild, why I was, like, so hesitant for that game. I wanted it to be good, I really did, but, like, Skyward Sword left a bad taste in my mouth. I could not bring myself to finish that game. And I remember, here's your emotional response to games that I have fairly regularly now. And I'm kind of glad that I let myself be that way. We're like, you know what? We're just going to have a big old cry for this game. When you boot up Skyward Sword, or not Skyward Sword, fuck Skyward Sword. When you boot up Breath of the Wild for the first time, and I wish I had booted it up on, like, one of my TVs with the soundbar and everything, because it would have given me just a little bit more. But in a way, I'm glad I didn't, because it created this really, like, quiet, like, intimate moment with this experience. Because, like, I'm sitting here on what is essentially a handheld, which kind of brings me back to being a kid again in some way. Nintendo, I know what you did. All right, don't think I don't know. And you like you step out of the Shrine of Resurrection, like you wake up and you know they kind of like here's the controls, go. You step out and it does this huge sweeping shot of the Hyrule countryside with like the some of the most orchestration you're going to hear in the game, but this dun 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 you know builds and builds and builds the really quiet piano motif into this the big like you know they have the harp sweep and everything. The wind goes by, and I sat there and I set my Switch down and I just cried for about 5 minutes because it was like I knew in that moment, just with that sweep, I'm like, this is going to be different. This is going to capture what it was like to be a little kid again. And I also know I'm going to get wildly frustrated playing this game, and I am excited. Because, holy shit, that game took off the training wheels the second you step out of that shrine. In terms of, like, I was ready for it a little bit because I'd just gotten off playing Dark Souls 3. So, like, constantly getting killed and jumping back in, I'm like, alright, we're kind of used to this, whatever. But I didn't expect it out of a Zelda game. They don't give you armor. They don't give you a proper weapon. The first enemy you go up against, one of the little goblin dudes, you have a stick. You have a stick and a shirt that's too small for you. That's what you got. And you gotta win. You can't beat him? He's your first boss, man.
Oh yeah, you know, it's always amazing when those new releases can recapture that sense of nostalgia. And you know, I talking of nostalgia in these older games, I did want to I did want to talk briefly because I actually have to wrap up in a minute here, but I did want to talk briefly before we go about our experience playing Age of Empires 1 Definitive Edition the
Yeah.
other day. Um, I think so. For those who may not know, Age of Empires, the first Age of Empires game came out in 1997, I believe. And for me, that was the first RTS game that I ever really played. It was the beginning of my love affair with the RTS genre, and really that whole style of gameplay. Still, probably some of my favorite games to play. And I remember I was listening to the soundtrack the other day, and it was just like I booted up that first piece. I think it's called like Age of Empires 1 Cave or something, the one with the like flute motif, and I was instantly just like bam. For me, it wasn't 1997 because that's when I was born, but it was like back in like 2003, just like sitting on my grandpa's old desktop computer playing some Age of Empires 1 for the first time, and it was just like I feel like I had that similar moment that you're talking about where it was just like bam, right back to that time, that experience. And that was what really inspired me to want to pick up the definitive edition, play it, see what I could recapture of that. And let me preface by saying I think that the biggest issue that we faced playing that game, at least for me, was that the AI was too stupid. Like, it was on the second to hardest difficulty, and it was just impossibly dumb. Which is puzzling because the AI, my understanding is that the updated AI for Age of Empires 2 is actually quite good. And can be pretty challenging to face up against. I know that the Viper, for anyone who knows, the Viper is like considered to be the best pro Age of Empires 2 player. He actually did a YouTube series where he did like himself versus 5 hardest AI, which, I mean, it's what it is. The fact that he can take 5 of them on is, obviously they have not reached anywhere near the skill threshold of a pro player, but the fact that that's a challenge that is even worth his time says something. Whereas I feel like it wouldn't be worth his time to fight like 20 of these AI that we faced.
Right.
They were just impossibly dumb. They didn't really have any military units, so that was an issue. I I think though that part of it is just what we've been talking about as a whole. I feel like we could almost call this the theme of the last few streams is this discussion about what the classics brought us versus what the newer installments have done. Comparing those two games, like those two like generations of games in any franchise. And I think that for me and for many people who might be tempted to pick up the definitive edition of Age of Empires 1, Age of Empires 2 just does everything better. Even with the quality of life improvements that they've made in Age of Empires 1, which are considerable. If you and I booted up the original Age of Empires 1 and tried to do a game, first of all, it'd be a nightmare to get online, but let's just imagine that we could do that. It would be telling, not just for the graphics. I think that we can both see past graphical things to some extent, but just like issues of AI, of UI, of like the interface, just so many quality of life improvements they added. They added queuing. You didn't used to be able to multi-queue, and I know that pros turn off multi-queue anyway, but I'm not a pro. You didn't used to be able to multi-queue. There was all kinds of pathing issues with units. Just there were so many problems that they've just fixed, and things that they've added that they're like, oh, everyone who plays Age of Empires 2 is going to expect multi-queue. And I think, in fairness, they actually added multi-queue in the original Rise of Rome expansion, but they've updated it in the definitive edition. But all that to say, even with those improvements, it's just so clear. It's like, why am I not playing Age of Empires 2? Playing Age of Empires 3, you can kind of be like, this is a very different mood. Like, it's not grid-based. It's a much more fast-paced game. The interface looks a lot different than previous games, while still being recognizable as an Age of Empires game. The graphic style is kind of different, and so you can kind of get in the mood to play Age of Empires 3, and you don't spend the whole time playing that game going, why aren't I playing Age of Empires 2? But I just don't think Age of Empires 1 is unique enough compared to Age of Empires 2. Like, I feel like if they, instead of releasing Age of Empires 1, had just released a reskin of Age of Empires 2 with Age of Empires 1 era units and like the soundtrack, no one would ever play the Age of Empires 1 definitive edition again.
Probably not.
And that is kind of sad, but at the same time, I think that it's okay for us to acknowledge, just like you're saying with those other Zelda games like Skyward Sword, we can acknowledge what they did for the genre and also acknowledge their flaws.
Well, in my opinion, Skyward Sword set the entire franchise back, but that's an opinion of mine. Because
but I'm sure you can think of examples.
Oh,
of games.
Yeah, no, like I often use Zelda as kind of the tent pole for a lot of this, just because they, up until Skyward Sword, like they were the people who were writing the book on a lot of this kind of stuff, and they were the ones who were more or less showing like, oh, this is what's good, and we're going to show you how it can be good, despite the fact that maybe nobody else has ever done this. They were the ones who put out the original Legend of Zelda on the NES. There weren't games like that, and it just kind of threw you into the world. With A Link to the Past out on the SNES, they'd had a couple. They'd learned from their previous experiences and released this super like, I would still boot up Link to the Past to this day and enjoy it. The speed run for that game is interesting. Strangely enough, in between those two games is Zelda 2, The Adventures of Link, that nobody really played because it was like this idea of, okay, we already did like top-down 2D adventure. Let's do a side-scroller now. It is unrecognizable. Because that top-down or like isometric style format, or that like, pseudo top-down at an angle, is fairly common now for pretty much all the mobile Zelda games, the handheld ones, sure. As well as the remaster they did for Link's Awakening, or I guess the remake at this point, and then all the 3D Zeldas pretty much followed the Ocarina of Time format, which they helped set forth. Even with Wind Waker that came out on the GameCube, they kind of help set forth, okay, well, here's what you can do with something that's kind of cutesy and cell shade, and here's your big open world to sail in. This is going to sound stupid, but you know what? If they didn't make Wind Waker, we wouldn't have gotten to have Black Flag.
Yeah,
Obviously, there are some steps in between, but you know,
and that would have been an insurmountable tragedy which history would never have recovered from, at least in my opinion.
yeah, in your opinion, in you opinion,
Uh,
but yeah, it's you cannot look at some of these games with this perfect. You have to be willing to take the nostalgia glasses off at some point to look at these games critically, because I mean there are games that I grew up with that, again, like I take those nostalgia glasses off and I kind of realize they're sort of trash. Games like Legend of Dragoon and Jade Cocoon, which were two like PlayStation era RPGs. The oh gosh, there's a Mobile Suit Gundam game. I think it's Federation versus Xeon, I think is what it is. That I think it's a great arcade Gundam game, but it I don't think it holds up if memory serves. Cause I think I booted up on an emulator and I immediately got frustrated. There's even now we have Xbox 360 and even Xbox One era games that didn't age well. The first Gears of War is a frustrating experience now because all the other ones are so much better. Like we even that currently in the gaming history, we have these games that were produced within the past 10 years that are still just like, they could have been better type thing. But then it's because they had sequels that came out later that are freaking fantastic.
yeah, absolutely. That is, and you know, it's kind of, I think it's something to celebrate in a way. It's easy for us to kind of get disappointed when we go back to these games that were such the pillars of our memories and find that they're not really that awesome compared to what we've played before. But I feel like that sting is lessened when we recognize the reason that our experience with them is not the same as it was is not because we've gotten older, but because there's so much better stuff available.
Exactly.
Bringing it back to the tragedy of the human condition, the real
Right.
thing that we'll never recapture is being 6 years old, or 10 years old, or 16 years old, whatever. Uh,
But it's being
I,
able to play some of these games that help kind of recapture that for a moment. I think they've gotten better and better at Nintendo and like Nintendo is the king at recapturing that feeling right now. And it's because they've been around for as long as they
yeah,
have.
I mean, it helps to have. I mean, if you have access to a franchise which has existed since then, I mean, that is a huge opportunity to do that.
And
Well, hey, I got to get wrapped up here. So, anything you want to leave the stream with?
um not that I can really think of. I know that we got some exciting releases coming up soon. I know I am stoked beyond belief for Cyberpunk 2077, which is coming out in November. I'm kind of depressed they did the delays because it was going to release by now, but they kind of took the, you know what, let's not crunch. Let's just get it right.
I think that's always a good decision.
Oh, yeah. I know there's a couple other releases that are approaching here soon. I'm excited for
Baldur's Gate
Assassin's... Oh,
3, right?
the what?
Baldur's Gate 3, right? It's coming soon.
I forget about that just because they're not like hyping it. It's not in the same like hype sphere as some of the other games. I know I'm really excited for Assassin's Creed Valhalla, even
Ah,
though
yeah.
I know deep down it's just going to be exactly like Odyssey was. But I enjoyed Odyssey. Like Odyssey is a solid 8 out of 10 experience.
It's fun.
And you know what? In the Assassin's Creed games now, like between Syndicate and Odyssey, I'm like, yeah, I want to play as Evie. I want to play as Cassandra because the guys are bland and uninteresting. But they have fucking beard customization. What am I supposed to do? I want to rock the countryside with Lady Ivor, but knowing that I can customize my beard is just like,
Damn you!
"Argh!" Anyway. So,
That's
what about
great.
you? Anything you want to leave the stream with?
Hang on, I'm being told to get Windows Update. Snooze that. Um, yeah, just stay safe with all the smoke out there if you're living on the west coast of the U.S. And if you're living anywhere, just stay safe. What with all the disease stuff going on, and play video games. You know, it's something I wanted to just leave the stream with is I almost tweeted about this, but then I decided I didn't want to. I was listening to the radio today, and there were these people talking. It was this like radio segment, and they were talking about like guiding parents through controlling their kids' screen time essentially, and it was just like a really cringy thing for me to listen to because it was just full of the, you know, video games bad, like that kind of rhetoric, and it was just like, you know, obviously it's better to sit down and watch a movie with your family than to play video games with your friends. And I just wanted to say, you know, to anyone who might be feeling guilty or bad about playing a lot of video games, especially if you're playing with friends, like, don't worry about it. You know, if you've done everything you need to do, or if you just need a break to decompress between stuff, like, don't let anybody tell you that it's bad to play a video game. They're just wrong. Like, it's just not true.
Yeah, but it's just boot up whatever you love. That's probably what I'm gonna do after this. I'm probably just gonna do a bot stomp on League or something like that, just to kill some time and get some energy out. And eventually we'll jump back into Fire Emblem Three Houses. Remember, kids, Billy Kametz is the voice of the Ferdinand von Ayer, who you will always know his name because he is in fact Ferdinand von Ayer.